And our next speaker will be Kelly Cottle, who's going to talk about CPIC. You want to wear this? You can do that.
Okay. All right, good afternoon. I was in Spain 2 days ago, so I'm a little tired right now. It's all starting to hit me right now. So I just drank some coffee, and I think it was decaf. So, sitting over here thinking, I think I'm more tired. All right, but we're going to get through this. All right, so this is just a general update of CPIC. If you call into the CPIC calls every month, you've already heard a lot of this because we do try to update our members in the first 30 minutes of that call. The second 30 minutes, we usually have some type of presenter. If you've got an interesting implementation project or you've implemented at your hospital and you'd like to present out this on a CPIC call, I think our members give great feedback, ask great questions, can really help your program. Come talk to me. I've got August filled, but I need speakers for the rest of the year. So I thought I'd start with that. So, and another big thing, I stand up here representing a lot of people. Terry Klein, who will be talking to you later about ClinGen and ClinPGx, and Michelle World-Carrillo, who will be talking about PharmGKB and PharmCat after me. So they're definitely the leaders of CPIC, but we also have our staff, who I still consider very big leaders because of the workload that they do. Rose Donnelly, and I'm sorry, where is she? I forgot to change her name on the slide. Sorry about that. She recently got married. She keeps telling me over and over again, Kelly, it's not Camel anymore. Lee Gong and Katrin Senkel, they're both curators at PharmGKB or scientists at PharmGKB, but they do a lot of work on the CPIC guidelines that I don't think they really get a lot of credit for because it's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. But our authors certainly know the amount of work that goes into those evidence tables that we have. You see that pretty printed one, which probably still takes you a while to get through. Can you imagine going through each one of those papers? And so this is what they do. And then Ryan and Mark are both part of the IT that help where you can see it, getting the CPIC guidelines into the CPIC database and, of course, posted to PharmGKB. Okay. We still do have a CPIC informatics working group. I kind of wanted to throw this out here. This was the group that really helped push forward our database and our implementation resources that we have. We used to meet about every other month, but now we've just kind of combined those into our monthly CPIC calls because we were having less and less people call in for those. But if we do have an informatics thing that comes up and we need member feedback, we'll call that group back together. And it's a great forum for us to discuss all of our issues. This is led by Michelle World-Carrillo and James Hoffman, who is over here on my left. But a little bit about the CPIC and where we are right now and where we were. So CPIC was, we started in about 2009. I think the first guideline was 2010. I started with CPIC. This was originally started by Terry Klein at Stanford and Mary Relling at St. Jude. I started working for Mary at that time, around 2012, I guess, running CPIC and coordinating all the CPIC guidelines. And I think we had about 60 members at that time. And so we've really grown over the last 10 to 12 years. We've got 730 members now from 523 institutions and 49 countries. Those monthly calls, we now have I think we had 230 people call in to the last call. So we definitely have members that are very engaged and eager to learn. And I couldn't be more thankful for that. We now have 32 guidelines, if that math is correct. We just had 2 new published, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. Well, they're accepted, so hopefully will be published soon. This now covers 29 genes and over 150 drugs. So this has certainly grown, especially the G6PD guideline, where I think we looked at 50 drugs at one time. That one really pushed that number up, but I think it was an incredibly important guideline. We also have a lot of international representation on all of our guidelines. It's very important to us. Our guidelines used to be around 10 authors. Now we're up to about 20, 24, because it really is important to us that we have that international representation, that we're hitting different populations of people to include in the guidelines. So we really getting everybody on one call is impossible because it's always the middle of the night for somebody. But we do it. But we are a global organization. And so this just kind of shows you that we are pretty much hitting, I think, every continent, but all over the world. And again, very engaged. I have people that call into that CPIC call where it's still the middle of the night for them. I do record those, so if you can't call in, let me know. I'm happy to send that to you. When I remember to push the record button, we record them. But I've just hired some help, so hopefully she'll remember because I get a little distracted on those calls. But we are a global organization from all over the world. I forgot to update this slide, but we now have 32 guidelines, and this covers 29 genes and over 150 drugs. One thing I want to point out to you, and this is going to be really important when you guys get to see the CYP2B6 and methadone guideline, is that we really are we're doing a lot of work looking at evidence for genes in which are not actionable. We go into it not knowing, we think maybe there could be some action there, but a lot of these genes are being tested by laboratories and reporting back with certain gene-drug interactions. And so this is why it became a priority for CPIC, as we were already doing a guideline on that gene class. We've included these drugs. I will tell you this has been an incredible amount of work as well, because some of these genes have thousands of papers that we're having to review, and the nomenclature can be all over the place, and so it can really make it even more difficult to review those papers. But when you see that CPIC level C, in my opinion, these can be just as important as one of our CPIC level A or B, where we have an actionable recommendation, because it says, hey, you know what, your patient's got a variant OPRM1, but really clinically there's nothing you can do with that result. Maybe informative, I don't know, but from an actionability standpoint, it's just not actionable at this time. The beta blocker guideline, the beta blocker guideline, we did have several that were no recommendations. We do have a recommendation for CYP2D6 and metoprolol, and that one just got accepted. Actually, I think I've got some emails in my email box right now where I need to confirm some stuff. So hopefully that will be posted soon online. As soon as they're published online with our publisher, we can post them to the CPIC website. So almost immediately, we do try to do that within 1 or 2 days, and it gets included into the database not long after that. We also have the CYP2B6 methadone guideline. This will be our first guideline where it's a full CPIC level C. There's no actionable recommendation in it, and trust me, the reviewers gave us a little bit of heck for that, but but there'll be a commentary that'll be written about that, just about the importance of the no recommendations, because it is still clinically important, and just in a different way. So I've already talked about the new guidelines. I wanted to highlight this incredible work that we did for the SSRIs, SNRIs, and then other serotonin-like drugs. This one was published, I think, midsummer last year. Again, a huge undertaking. I think this guideline took us 2.5 years to complete. And this was not because people were working pretty much all the way through this time. Laura's laughing because she was part of this. She knows the many calls that we had to go. We had to really try to get consensus on these recommendations. And as I said, methadone and beta blockers should be hopefully published soon. We have several guidelines that are in progress. I'm going to walk you a little bit through how we prioritize our guidelines. But right now, we have quite a few that need to be updated. And I think I'd rather, I know we've got some new guidelines that need to be done, but I'd rather not have bad information out there. So the ones that we need to update, we need to update them soon. CYP3A5 tacrolimus, you heard Amy talk about earlier. This guideline, we're really going to try to look a little bit differently at the evidence and look at different dosage forms. So maybe we will have some differences in doses between IV and oral tacrolimus. I can't promise you the data is not looking great, but we'll at least still have that oral recommendation. And they're also looking a little closer at donor versus recipient for liver in that one as well. So there'll be a lot of changes in that guideline, probably multiple recommendation tables. So it will take time. It will take some time. But they are almost, they are through the first part of evidence review. So when they're looking at 3A5 and 3A4, so who knows, there could be a 3A4, but then that will extend out the time it takes because we'll have to do the allele function stuff for 3A4. So more to come on that, but I'll keep everybody up to date on our CPIC calls. CYP2D6 antipsychotics, this is out for evidence review for CYP2D6. The authors are still discussing what other genes we may include in that guideline. NAT2 hydralazine, we just started, again, in evidence review. UGT1 irinotecan, this is on my list. I think I get a weekly email from someone asking me, when are we going to do this guideline? I had it, we started the evidence review, and then there was 2 papers published for DPYD and another paper for TPMT NUT15 that affected our recommendations in the current guidelines. And because of that, I had to reprioritize these guidelines. We have a small but dedicated staff of individuals, so trying to keep them from being overwhelmed. So I promise this one will get started hopefully by the end of the year, and we are already about halfway through the evidence review, so that will get us a step closer. And there's a lot of studies for that one as well. As I just said, we're updating DPYD, fluoropyrimidines, and TPMT, NUD-T15 thiopurines. If you go to those guideline pages on the CPIC website, we have kind of done an interim kind of update there of the evidence. One, looking at a rec for TPMT, NUD-T15, when you've got a patient who's IM for both, we now have a recommendation there. So we'll be updating that guideline to include that recommendation. And then for DPYD, there was a paper looking at overall survival and differences. And so there may be some changes in our allele function assignments for that guideline, but we are now very closely looking at that, that evidence as well. And then CYP2D6 on Dancitron, this one has got to be updated. I don't think this has been updated since 2014, I think. And I know there's a lot of new great data for this one. I have a group actually in Australia that's working on the evidence review, so I'm hoping we can push this one along pretty quickly once they're done with that portion. So I am trying to figure out where to get resources elsewhere besides using our staff. Okay, so every year or every other year, I try to send out, and sorry, this is a busy slide, but I try to send out a survey to our members. So we prioritize based on the authors that we have. I can't really do an antipsychotic and an antidepressant guideline at the same time because there'll be a lot of the same authors on both of those guidelines. So that sometimes kind of can make us have to deprioritize one. But clearly everybody wants this UGT1 and irinotecan guideline. So again, I promise it's coming. This was not unexpected. With a few others, NAT2 isoniazid. Since we're working on NAT2 hydralazine, I've had some discussions with the WHO about possibly having some of their support to help support that guideline because it really will be a more international type guidance for that one. And we have to think more about resources outside the United States than I think we do on our current guidelines. So that one, hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll get that one going. But we'll continue to ask our members what they had. And then we had some good ideas, an MTHFR guideline. I don't know if we'll do that one, but many people mentioned that. But that one will come, but probably later. Okay. Another thing that we're doing, and this is going to be a little different. So I know you guys have seen on our website, you know, we have the genotype to phenotype translations. I know you probably take those a bit for granted, but I cannot even tell you how much work those tables take. CYP2D6, and my gosh, you keep adding the alleles to it. I was like, what are we at now, 170? I mean, okay, yeah, okay. So PharmVar does the nomenclature. CPIC does the clinical function. So we assign that function that you then see on PharmVar and that's utilized in our guidelines. This has, again, become a lot of work for our guideline authors. It used to be the guideline authors that would either create these or update them, depending if we'd already had them. But now we're going to create these, and this has already started. I think I've got a couple of panels going now, a CPIC allele function expert panels. And so they will just focus on the function assignments for these. And to be more transparent about these tables, we will be publishing this separately from the guidelines. It won't change much in the use of the CPIC guidelines, but it gives that group, of course, the work that's working on this, an additional publication. But I think it allows us to really discuss, you know, why decisions were made or maybe why we may not have assigned a function. So I think this will be a really great way for us to be a bit more transparent in these assignments. So more to come on that. So I just want to brag a little bit about CPIC for a little bit. We'll be up for funding again in about a year and a half. So we are highly cited, and people are really using these guidelines. And so you can kind of see that, of course, there's guidelines that are more cited than others. Some of these are fairly new, so that's why their citations are a little bit lower. But overall, our guidelines have been cited over 11,000 times. Delete this one. I love that. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Sadly, I put that for the person put that. Just now noticed it. It was I'll tell you, it was a paper about CPIC. It wasn't a guideline. So but it got pulled with all the citation data. That's funny. I didn't just now notice that. Anyway, but we are highly cited guidelines, and we continue to track that. This data is not quite as new as the citation data because this is harder to get because I have to get it from our publisher. But these show you how often guidelines are downloaded from. Can we get this top thing to go away? It's starting to drive me. I can't even see the top of the slide. I don't know how to escape on the board. Or will it? It won't. There we go. He's got it. Yeah. Thank you. I had to remember what I was talking about. Okay. So this shows you downloads from CPT. So you can get our guidelines from Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics, which is where we publish. You can get our guidelines, of course, from the CPIC website and also from PharmGKB. This data does not show you downloads from PubMed Central, but we are certainly there. We're NIH funded. So there, I expect there's quite a few more, but you can see that our guidelines are downloaded, or I think these are viewed, maybe not complete downloads, but these guidelines are viewed actually quite often. And this is from 2022. I expect these numbers are probably a bit bigger now. Okay. We continue to work with other professional societies to try to get endorsement. I think, we've talked a little bit about how physicians don't know what CPIC is, but they do know what their major guidelines are, right? The rheumatology example, right? They knew about at least the gene drug pair because it was in their guideline. And so we have been kind of working with some organizations to try to get pharmacogenomics in. I think we've had some success with NCCN and a few other the cancer guidances, but not much more. So if you've got it in, especially with like the American Heart Association or one of the bigger cardiology. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yay. That's good to hear. Hey, but it's a step in the right direction. I will take it. But we do our best to try to get these disseminated the best we can. And so we are in the this is genetic testing registry. We're endorsed by ASHP, which if you're not a pharmacist, this is a very large pharmacy organization. And of course, ASCPT has also endorsed our guidelines. And a big win a few years ago was getting at least links in ClinGen to the CPIC and PharmGKB data. More to come on that. Terry's gonna, I don't want to take Terry's talk here, but she'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to become a bit more fully integrated into ClinGen in the future. These are highly used guidelines. I'm going to try to walk you through this figure, but we just did a quick search. This was a figure from the grant, but we just looked at, we did PubMed searches for clinical implementation, pharmacogenomics. We were just looking for any type of study where they were doing a pharmacogenetic type study, any type of implementation around pharmacogenomics. And we really just asked the question, how many were using CPIC? And some were just genotype to phenotype translation. Some actually used our recommendations if it was a clinical study, so it's kind of all over the place. But 67% of these papers were using CPIC in some way, with 21% of those being outside the United States. And again, this is a little outdated, so we're updating this figure for a publication now. I expect that hopefully that number goes up a bit over the last couple of years. So I know y'all saw this early this morning, so I was excited that I already had this in my slides. We talk a lot about, I keep hearing this learning health systems. I keep hearing about it, and I keep thinking, gosh, and this kind of what clinical guidelines kind of do this, and we have done this very well at St. Jude, in my opinion, where we're doing the research, we're making new discoveries, and they're getting implemented into the CPIC guideline and then into our electronic health record. And we do this fairly quickly. It's really great that we have the researchers that do TPMT, NUT-T15 testing. For example, Serene Haydar, who runs our pharmacogenomics program, she had a patient who was a NUT-T15 IM and TPMT IM, and we didn't really have great guidance on that in the CPIC guideline because we didn't have any data. She goes to one of our researchers and said, hey, you got this big data set. Do you have this data? Do you have any patients that fit this criteria? And sure enough, he did. And that's what actually got him to start pulling this data out. And guess what? It is now incorporated, at least in the update on the webpage, and eventually will be updated in the guidelines. So we do try. We're consistently getting new evidence feedback about our guidelines, not only from the St. Jude users, but of course outside users, to help really build those guidelines up. So what are we going to do in the future? I see you. What are we going to do in the future? We're going to continue to do what we do well, right? We're going to continue to write these clinical practice guidelines. That will still be the main focus of CPIC. We've got a limited staff, limited resources, and I think we've done pretty good with that. And I'm scared if we try to branch out too much, we might lose that initial focus. So we're going to really still pay attention to these, but also continually think about how can we support the adoption of pharmacogenomics really into standard of care. I put this here, and I kind of mentioned this already. ClinGen is really, I think, kind of that authoritative central resource that really defines the clinical relevance of genes and variants for genetic diseases. But pharmacogenomics is barely mentioned in this website. As I said, it just kind of clicks over to, CPIC website or PharmGKB. And we really think that us integrating pharmacogenes better into ClinGen might help with that dissemination problem that we do have. But we're going to have to use the common language that people that use this website know. So there's working groups right now that I know Terry will talk about later, but I'm incredibly supportive of this work. I think this is a big win for CPIC if we can really move this forward. Another thing, we probably will have another standardization, especially with NAT2 coming up. I may be reaching out to our experts again about what are we going to call NAT2? Do we use the metabolizer status? So I think we're going to go there. But this is a paper that we wrote, just kind of really focusing on, hey, we've got these standards. People need to start using these standards. And I use this because we quote Elvis. I'm from Memphis. I grew up in Memphis. And let me tell you, there's one more Elvis quote in the paper, but you'll have to go read that paper to see that Elvis quote. But I think we'll continue to focus on that. So all in there, but I just, really, it is, I can't tell you how thankful, I am amazed about the work that a lot of our authors do on these guidelines, hours and hours and hours of time they spend looking through evidence on these conference calls, dealing with me on an almost daily basis. And so I feel very blessed that I get to work with such great people. So all in there, but thank you.